Photography has so many avenues for photographers to photograph landscape, people, portraits, odds and ends. One of the ones is areas of photography I think it is most commonly overlooked is the world of macro photography. And it's a whole different world. In a lot of ways, it's like being a young kid again, to where you come in and you explore the world that's right at your fingertips. And photographically, that's what we're doing. Today, we're going to explore an area of photography that's one of my favorite, macro photography. When you are a photographer, and especially if you're a storytelling photographer, you tend to take things, you go this way, you get that wide sense of place, you come in, you get the portraits, and then you get the details. Macro is all about details. You get a chance to come in and see the top of a flower, part of a flower, not the whole identifying feature of a flower, the colors and close-ups of a caterpillar's head, the close-up of a coin. That's the beauty of macro. It takes this place like a little kid getting back to where things are at their fingertips, and we get a chance to really explore that world that exists way down. And it's a lot of fun, and we're going to shoot a lot of things today, and you're going to enjoy where we are, and I hope you'll go there too. Enjoy. So a couple of things to be aware of when you're hearing about macro photography and the different lenses that are out there. You'll see that some lenses are 1:1, some lenses are 1:2. So if you look at this photograph, you can see that this photograph is 1:1. I've gone full frame with the 200 millimeter, getting as close as I possibly can to the subject and still get it in focus. And see how it fills the frame? Now I'm going to put on the 105, and if you look at the 105 and I get as close as I possibly can to it, with the 105, maximum distance, maximum frame, look at the difference here. So you can see you've got a 1:1 and a 1:2. And those are the different ratios that you hear about macro photography and how they approach your subject matter from a focal length perspective. So when dealing with that, and we're looking at things like depth of field. Depth of field is a very, very important part of macro photography. There are going to be times when you need it, there are going to be times when you don't need it, but the one thing that's always critical is that there's very little of it. And when you get really close to a subject like that, your depth of field just shrinks. So it's really hard to get something sharp from the beginning of the frame to the end of the frame. And so even if you go to like f40, which some of these lenses, macro lenses will do, you're not really increasing it for, you're going to see the flowers and what have you in the background and the very tip of the leaf that you're shooting, if you're shooting a flower, in the foreground. It doesn't work that way. And so be aware of that, and it becomes a compositional tool for you as well. But when I think about depth of field, the considerations that I have, I think more than anything else, is what can I shoot without getting a soft photo based on movement. So my depth of field oftentimes is determined by that movement. It can become a compositional tool, but if I'm shooting flowers outside and they're moving just the slightest amount, believe me folks, if you're shooting at a quarter second, a half a second, or 1 second, and you can even see movement, it's going to be a soft photograph. So you either have to increase your depth of field by opening up, or decrease your depth of field by opening up and allowing more light in so you can use a faster shutter speed, or you have to ramp up your ISO in order to acquire a higher shutter speed to stop that action. So really be conscientious of that, especially when you're dealing with the 200 macro versus the 105 macro. That increased focal length and magnification even accentuates even more how much movement you get. So you have to be careful about that. So then when it comes to focus, if something's moving and you're on autofocus, and with that great magnification, if you're on autofocus and the plant is just moving just a little bit, the autofocus is going to zit, 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 keep finding. So I've oftentimes found that it's easier to take it off of autofocus and put it on manual, manually focus. If I'm on my tripod, on something that's not moving very much, it gives me a greater sense of control. I can really hone right in on my spot and get that shot, and knowing that my focus is going to be exactly where I see it, rather than having to wait for it to go back and forth with autofocus and potentially lose the shot. So composition with macro, it's the same set of guidelines and rules and instincts that you use in anything else. It's just that you're closer to everything. And I look at this as I'm always trying to get the most pleasing composition in close-up photography, just like I do in any other type of photography that I'm doing. I very rarely put anything, for example, right smack in the center of the shot. One of the things that you can use as a compositional tool in macro photography is the depth of field is so compressed that you can use that knowing that your eye goes to the sharpest and the brightest spot in every photograph first. Where do you position the brightest and the sharpest spots in that photograph in order to get it? You know, a flower that's got a round curve to it, for example, with dewdrops on one of the petals. If you focus on the petals at 4 or 5 petals in and allow the rest of them to fall off, you simplified your composition. Your focus is going to one spot, and it may be way to the left or it may be way to the right. You've got an insect on a leaf. It could be way to the left, way to the right. Find ways to make the composition interesting, even though it's macro photography. And don't be afraid to do that. The components of depth of field, composition, light, all of these qualities go into the making of a macro photograph just like they do on any other kind of landscape shot you have, portrait shot that you want to make. All of these things are basically the same. It's photography, so don't be intimidated by that. Create and compose like you normally would. When you consider what focus does for macro photography, use that focus, and you're going to see when you're in close on a subject, when you change the focus, you're going to watch the focus just track throughout the shot. And there's going to be one spot in that shot where the composition all comes together. Remembering that you can be left or right, top or bottom, doesn't have to be centered, which of course is kind of a boring way to, compose shots, but allow that focus to really define where it is. Keeping in mind, the highlights and the sharp spots where your eye goes first in a photograph, you can utilize that concept in being able to find the best ways to take pictures. When you hit the road and you're out taking pictures, you try to bring as much equipment as you possibly can for the purpose that you're trying to go out and cover. If I'm out shooting macro, there's 3 different basic lenses that you can take with you on your macro shoots. There's a normal macro, which is usually a 55mm macro, and there's a 105 macro, which is probably the most popular macro lens that we use. And then we can get into some of the bigger macros, which is the 200mm macro, and you can see it's a little bit twice the size of the 105, gives me greater magnification, 1-to-1 ratio, 1-to-2 ratio. And it gives me a great opportunity to go out and photograph things with a number of different compression levels. But when you hear macro photography, you hear about other things like extension tubes. And extension tubes are definitely an option in shooting macro. What those are is they're just tubes that have no glass in them. And you take your lens off, you put the tube in, and then you take your lens and you put your lens in front of the tube, and it increases your distance like the old view cameras and the bellows. And while it can get you closer, it also has some pretty severe disadvantages in that the light is no longer traveling through glass, it's traveling through air. So it's darker, it tends to be more grainy, and it's just not the way that most people will go. But if you want to get super, super close-ups of things, you can make your own macro lenses, extension tubes very easily with something as simple, believe it or not, as like an old roll of center of the toilet paper will actually make you a zoom lens. You tape it up, put your lens, tape your lens to it, and you've got yourself a macro lens that's going to give you greater magnification. Other ways that people will do it is they'll use filters, and they're called diopters, and they can come in any number of magnifications, 1 power, 2 power, 3 power, 4 power, and all they are is like little magnifying glasses, and they go over your lenses and they focus. Again, it has its limitations. It's not the finest optical glass when it comes to the difference between a lens and a filter, but it's another one of those options. And I get comments from folks say, well, geez, I saw this great shot of a close-up of a fly's eyes where I could see thousands and thousands of his little eyeballs inside his big eyeball. Well, that's not macro photography for the most part. You're starting to get into micro photography, and that's where you're dealing with microscopes and very high-end optics for very, very close-up photography. So it's a little different than our standard macro photography when we go out. So those are your basic lens groups, the 55, the 105, and the 200mm macro lenses. And so with these items, when you head out into the field, you've got just about everything that you need to be able to go out and shoot macro work. So there are times in macro photography we need light other than good old Mr. Sunshine. And so I will carry a variety of items with me when I'm traveling to be able to accentuate my light as I needed. This is called Elastolight, and it's a great little device that I use. That's a portable softbox, and I can take it anywhere. It's got a great clamp on it, so I can clamp it on a tree. I can clamp it on a rock. I can stick a stick in the ground and clamp it to that and get some nice light on my subject by just using this light. And basically, the Elastolight uses your traditional flash. So this is a unit that's designed to have your flash from your camera that you normally buy go inside of this nice softbox and give me that option. Other options that you're going to see with close-up photography, there's another option that is really popular for extreme close-ups, and that's what's known as the ring light. And the ring light is kind of a neat way to flash. It's specifically made for macro photography because it fits right on the end of your lens, like this. And so you have an option here. There's basically two flashes in here. There's one on this side, one on this side, and it goes all the way around. So if you want to have, think about the sun. The sun comes up, the light's highlighting one side and not lighting the other. That's the same thing that you have control in doing with this, as well as it giving even light, so the entire part of the ring light is lit, giving you very even lighting and distribution everywhere. Some subject matter, you want that. Others, you want a little bit of an accent light, darker on one side, a little brighter on the other. The ring lights are how you do that. It's a great way to do it. Other ways for lighting, you know, we have our typical way of photographing light kind of on the fly with our reflectors. And I tend to carry 3 of these with me everywhere I travel, especially with macro photography. You know, you've got the very large size, and then I've got, you know, a medium size, and then I've got a really small size. And the small size is really good for macro because if you're coming in close to flowers, you know, you don't want such a big reflector that if you're moving it back and forth, part of the reflector hits the plant that you're shooting and causes it to move, creating that horrible wind. Is fake wind as it would be, it causes problems for you. So the small reflector really is a great way to go. Other ways are to use what's known as the dome light. And I love this thing. It's a great little device. It fits right on top of almost any lens or flash. It goes on to the top of it like this, and it sends out powerful light, but a wonderful diffused light. And the great thing about these is that you can not only have it on top of your flash, but if you decide that you want to shoot it off to the side, then you just use one of the wireless remotes that comes with a lot of the big cameras now. You can buy these separate, and then this sits on top of your camera, and then your flash can go off to the side either way with this dome light on, and it triggers wirelessly, and you can dial this down so it's 1 stop, too dark, 2 stops, too dark, 3 stops, or vice versa. So you really have a tremendous amount of control wirelessly by just setting this flash off in the ground or on top of a rock and triggering it with this remote unit. It's just another one of those options that you can use where you can basically take kind of a small studio with you anywhere you go outside to help give you top-notch macro shots. Have fun. You'll find in photography there's a lot of overlap in how we approach our subject matter. Using a telephoto lens versus a macro lens, for example. If I'm shooting with a 200mm telephoto lens and shooting with a 200mm macro lens, there are points, like you can see in these photos, where they actually look the same. They're kind of the same subject matter, same focal length, I'm getting the same compression. But we reach a point to where those two lenses start to show their specialties in how they create visually our subject matter. For example, in using a telephoto lens, I can be taking a close-up shot of this particular subject, and then I can get as close as I can to it within about 3 or 4 feet, and that's it. That's as far as that lens will get to me. So I can only shoot that subject to a point to where I'm only seeing a certain area. If I want to get closer, then I gotta enter into the macro world. And when I go into the macro world, now I can get within inches of my subject matter, and I can really start to feel the textures and the details of that subject matter in ways that a telephoto lens won't allow us. We can get close with a subject with a telephoto lens, bringing something further away in close, but we only get to that point. And then it's the macro world. And when we get to the macro world, look what we can see in the macro world and how it just changes going from one lens to another. And everything in the world starts to change visually for us. All right, so we've come across this wonderful, large hibiscus plant. And in looking at it, this is as close as I can get with an 80 to 200mm lens. This is as close as I can get. And so when I take a shot and I come in, I'm getting kind of a full frame shot. But the problem is that what I'm really attracted to is that center of this plant. It's going to be bathed in this gorgeous purple red color. The only way to do that is to go macro. I've got to get a little bit closer to the shot. I'm going to move in closer now with the macro, and you're really going to see an incredible difference in how I photograph this hibiscus plant. All right, so I've moved in very closely to this hibiscus plant. You can see the difference now that I'm getting between between the telephoto 200mm lens and this macro shot. And it's considerably different, but boy, has the intensity and the drama in this shot changed to a point to where now it's kind of becoming an abstract, and I'm not seeing the whole flower, which is as close as I can get with the telephoto. Now I'm inside the flower, and I'm seeing things that you really didn't notice particularly instantly when you were looking through the telephoto. Now I'm seeing it right here as a close-up, and it's making a really cool shot. So the light's changed, you know, just in the last couple of minutes. The sun's come up, and the plants that were bathed in shadow, which we like to be here for because early morning there's less wind, and so it's a good time to come if you're going to shoot things close-ups in macro. But the problem was a little bit of a breeze did kick up, and when that breeze kicked up, my plant was moving just enough, and it doesn't have to be much, the slightest bit, and I can't get a sharp photo. So things have changed, and the sun now has come up. It's bathing this particular plant in good sunlight. Now I can raise my shutter speed to stop the action, still have a moderate amount of depth of field, and I can get a sharp shot. And again, it's critical. If I were with a longer lens and I was moving back, I could get the whole flower in the shot and use a higher shutter speed because there's more surface area, there's more light. But now that I'm in close and I've got this telephoto almost like a close-up on a long gun, I don't have much room for error. So in order to get a sharp picture, I've moved to the sun. I'm able to get this shot now with a faster shutter speed, even staying at a lower ISO. See, she's still blowing. But even now, I'm shooting at 2/50th of a second on a tripod. Wait for it to settle, and I can get a sharp shot. Makes all the difference in the world. When you're thinking about destinations for shooting macro photography, it can be any place. A neighbor's garden, a cabin, a fence, anything where there's detail, close-up detail that begs to be seen up close. That's your place to go for macro photography. We found a lovely location here where we've got these fabulous orange plants. They kind of look like black-eyed Susans, but they're red-orange, so I don't know what they are. I'll find out later. But it's a good spot for us to come and get close-up shots. And there's a lot of things that are happening here. One, it's early in the morning, and the shade is still prevalent here, which is good for us because oftentimes that early in the morning, we're not getting that harsh light that comes from later in the afternoon type sunlight that you might get, as well as the winds tend to be down. And in macro photography, wind can be an incredible challenge for you. When you're shooting something so close that the slightest little movement bumps it and it goes in and out of focus, it can kill your shot. So early morning is a good time to do this. Right now the winds are just starting to pick up, and so when that happens, I've got a couple of options that I have to consider in shooting macro photography. One, I'm going to have to minimize my depth of field because if I want to stop the action, I've got to have a shutter speed fast enough to make sure that I'm not getting any movement in this shot. And in doing so, I have to open up or I have to ramp up my ISO. So the wind isn't that bad right now, so I'm able to shoot this particular flower now, and I'm just kind of getting the dewdrops on it, which is kind of nice because I don't have to come in with a spray bottle or wait. It's, again, early morning dew, and it's here. I can shoot fairly wide open, you know, f8, f11, still get a minimum amount of depth of field, but still be able to stop the action. And if there's any decision I have to make that's more critical than others, making sure that I stop the action, because if I want a sharp shot, I've got to be shooting at a shutter speed that's going to stop that action. So that role of aperture choice and ISO are some of the ingredients that you have to make with your shutter speeds in order to stop that action. The other thing is that when you come to a spot like this, there's all kinds of options that I can shoot. I don't have to shoot just this flower. I can look for longer ways. I can shoot vertical. I can shoot horizontal. The quality of light is going to change as the sun continues to come up, so there's tons of options that I can do. As well as I can choose lenses. I can have a 105 macro lens, or in this particular case, I've got a 200 macro lens, which really magnifies how close I can get to it. And I get down low, I can isolate just a couple of the dewdrops and just have that be my content. Whereas if I put on my 105, I can pull back just a little bit and I can actually see the whole flower and all of the droplets. So it becomes a choice of composition, it becomes a choice of visual flavor of what you want to get and how you want to approach it. So I've got my 200mm macro lens on here, and what I've found here is on this gorgeous flower, it's got these dewdrops all over it, and I'm coming down at an angle that's slightly sideways rather than straight down onto it. And in doing so, I'm able to kind of capture a few of the water droplets, and I'm letting a shallower depth of field, which is kind of inherent in macro work. If you want a lot of depth of field, it's going to be a long exposure, and things like wind are going to kill it. But I'm at an angle now with this 200 millimeter where I'm just focusing on one kind of petal with dewdrops on it. And I'm using a cable release too because I don't want to touch the camera because it's not a long exposure. It's 25th of a second, but that's long enough to, if I apply pressure to the camera, it's going to be out of focus. And I take my shot. And that's with this 200 millimeter lens, and it's got a nice compression effect. I'm able to isolate these subjects. And also, you know, I'm in the shade. And because I'm in the shade, I've also changed my white balance to a shade setting, because if I go to daylight in here, it's going to change the color. So the shade setting right now, because it's early morning light, is really nice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my 200 millimeter, and I'm going to drop back down to my 105 because I want to come in a little bit closer. And this is going to offer me a little different perspective now. So now I'm just going to inch closer. You know, one of the things you got to be aware of when you're doing this, whenever you're shooting a plant in particular, you know, plants spread out. And even though I've got a tripod here that is fairly wide as I've moved my legs out, every time I move my legs, I move another part of the plant, which inherently moves the piece of the plant that I want to shoot. So you've got to be really careful with that. That's something that'll just drive you crazy after a while if you keep bumping into stuff and moving it. So I've just changed my composition very little here, but I've come in a little bit closer. I'm shooting a little bit more of the plant, and I like that. So I'm pulled back just a bit, even though I've moved closer. It's a smaller compression lens. Same rules apply. Even with that magnification, I've got to come in. I've got to make sure that the plant is still. I don't want to move any of the plant. I'm going to come in fact, I'm going to lower my angle a little bit here because I just like that composition. You're going to find with macro, composing your shots is one of those challenges because every time you move just the smallest amount, it changes dramatically. But at the same time, with that shallow depth of field as a compositional tool, you can really add interest to your shot by isolating the most important part of the shot, remembering that your eye goes to the brightest and the sharpest spots in every photograph first. If you can incorporate those tools into your shot, compositionally, you can really use depth of field here as an advantage to what you want to have your sharp elements be. There it is right there, nice little dewdrop. There's no wind. Good time to get it. Let's take a look. Look at that, we're good to go. Very cool. So as you can see by looking at these shots, the big difference between shooting with the 200 millimeter macro and a 105 macro is obviously that compression, that telephoto aspect you get from the 200 versus the 105. Notice how much closer that 200 is versus the 105, and that compression effect that takes place as well. And you know, we were shooting in the shade this morning, and so one of the ways that we can help kind of pump that up a little bit is like any other normal shot you've seen in portraiture. Grab a reflector card, grab a piece of white paper, grab an old shirt, put it up next to your subject to balance the light. You can help fill that up and put highlights on those dewdrops or lighten the flower a little bit from underneath. Any number of things you can do to brighten up that shot. And use those two focal lengths to bring out the compositional visual elements that please you the most. Both do very different things, similar things, but very different things at the same time, and you can accomplish your goal. So in macro photography, I think one of the things we think about most is photographing things like insects and butterflies and caterpillars because they're available. Bees, they're in our backyards, they're in our neighborhoods, they're in our local parks, and we can go a number of places to get shots of these little guys. Macro photography brings us right in on top of them, which makes it a lot of fun to see eyes and fur and legs that look like scary horror movies. And to get those kinds of shots, you've got a number of things, again, that you have to play with and consider when you're shooting macro photography. One is the lens choice. You know, do I need to be a little bit further back so I don't spook the butterfly or the dragonfly while it sits on the top of that flower? So I'm using a longer lens like the 200 millimeter, which gets me a little closer but still is a macro. Or can I get closer with a 105? The one thing I have noticed over time, unless you're shooting in the winter or in the fall when bugs get a little cold and they don't move, you're going to have to get off the sticks. And it's kind of counterproductive in how we think about macro, because you hear and see all the time, you need to be on a tripod to get a sharp shot. Well, you know what, you're right. In studio situations and what have you, where you can control it and your subject's not moving, being on sticks is fine. But if you're trying to chase a butterfly, you're not going to have that kind of an option. By the time you set up and get it moved, it's going to be gone. So you need to be off a tripod and moving around, which means you're going to have to be on a faster shutter speed. Look at a macro lens the same that you might be using a long telephoto lens. You need to be at a shutter speed that's capable of stopping not only the action of the insect that you're shooting, but also be able to be fast enough shutter speed to prevent your own camera movement from happening. And so I kind of approach my subjects in a number of different ways. I try to get really close to them as quickly as I can, making sure that my exposure and everything is dead on, so as I move closer and closer at that chance that they're going to fly away, then I have the opportunity to get shots of them while I move in. So I start back and then I move in as close as I possibly can get and get as many shots as I can before the insect feels my presence and then splits. So that's one of the ways that we can get in really close. The other is to kind of look for areas where these insects hang out. Butterflies tend to like plants like butterfly weed. Bees tend to go from plant to flower to soak up the pollen. And so as you just stand in one spot, you look around and you can find where they hang out. So rather than chasing them all the time, hang out yourself and wait for them to come to you. They get used to seeing you. They may not be as spooked, and you can get better chances to get close-ups. Caterpillars are one of those things that you can get down really close to them, find them on a tree, find them on a bench, find them on a chair, and you can get pretty close. They're moving pretty slow, so you got better opportunities to get with them. All right, we've got this great caterpillar right now that's working on a leaf, and he's moving. He's on the other side. He's backlit. So it's one of those nice opportunities where I'm getting that creepy look of those legs on one side, but he's moving around, and now he's peeking over. There it is, there it is, there it is. Attaboy, stand up. So now he's moving around, and he's changing directions. And so he's giving me something different. Anytime something's moving, it's a better shot. Just seeing an insect just standing there is like just seeing a buffalo just standing there. But if buffalo starts to run, you got a different shot. Same is true with these insects. The minute they start to move, boy, the gold just starts to happen. And now he's eating. He's found a hole. Oh, there's a great hole there that he's just eaten from. He keeps going back and forth across the leaves, so he's moving. I've got cool stuff to shoot here. And when his shadow is on the other side, that even makes it better because I'm getting kind of two bugs for one. It's fabulous when this kind of stuff happens in macro photography. It's kind of like when you're shooting your dogs. If you have a pet and you're getting great shots of your dogs, the best place to be is, dog level, so you can see from a dog's perspective. If everything we always see is from the human perspective, you're not bringing anything new to the plate. Same is true with insects. If you can get insects from that ground level, from a bug's view, belly photography, as you can see, you're getting more dramatic shots. It's a great way to take pictures of insects. All right, I'm using a shutter speed. It's a pretty fast shutter speed. Not so much because I need to stop the action, even though it's a slow-moving caterpillar, but more because I want to make sure with this longer lens that I'm able to get sharp shots. That's what's most important to me. And, a sharp shot is always better. The details that you get in a photograph make such a difference. And so I err on the side of caution and try to make sure that I'm getting a sharp shot rather than risk a soft shot that will never work. You can't sharpen a soft shot to the point, especially with macro work, it begs to be sharp. And so that's what we're going to try to get here each and every time. Oh, that's nice. Now he's coming around the side. Look at that guy. He's going to fall. He's going to fall. So don't let the failings of bad photography follow you into the macro world. And what I mean when I say that is this, is that when you're shooting a portrait of somebody, you're making sure that a telephone pole isn't growing out of the back of their head. Well, you've got to take those same considerations when you're shooting macro photography. So look at this white butterfly. Got close enough to this white butterfly where I could actually start to see some of the dots on its wings. But it's white, so I've got to make sure that my exposure is correct. And so the other thing I take into consideration is I look at the background and think, well, if I stay at this angle, it's going to be white against white. But if I move just to the right, look how that dark background starts to accentuate that white butterfly now. And I've got this wonderful play off of my backgrounds. Those are kind of important things to consider. So again, don't forget about stuff that's behind your subject as well as your subject when you're getting close-up photographs of things like butterflies. The thing about butterflies as well is that, they like to stop and land, open and close their wings. So they're offering some motion for you in macro photography. That's a great way to shoot butterflies after they've landed. However, move to the bee. And now sometimes bees are nice to be able to see landing and moving back and forth and drinking the pollen as they move up and down plants. But at the same time, that's a shot that we see over and over and over again. And I tend to like those shots where you actually see a bee coming in for a landing or taking off right after they've drank some pollen, and they're kind of off on their drunken journey to the next plant. And that's a really fun way to see insects, is to actually see them in flight. But of course, it's inherently more difficult to do that because in macro photography, as you'll find, you move an eighth of a second away and they're already out of focus. So sometimes you predetermine where they're going to be. If you try to use autofocus, and I guess I don't recommend it on really extreme close-up photography when you're trying to find subjects that are moving, because especially with plants, because what happens is the camera is constantly trying to find a way to focus on your subject if it's moving. So I've actually found it to be more expeditious if I take it off of autofocus and just try to follow the insect on my own and actually predetermine the spot, so if he flies in and out of that, I'm able to get that bee in focus. So that's one of those ways that's fun to do it. Same is true with dragonflies. Fall is a great time to shoot dragonflies because they freeze and they are stuck there, so you can get really close to them and get nice shots of them because they don't move. Otherwise, dragonflies can be pretty elusive, and so you come in with a longer lens and get in an angle again where you can see them and sneak in as close as you can. A lot of times you can get a close-up shot of a dragonfly, and they have that long, skinny body, so you got to be aware of that and how it fits in the frame and how you shoot that. And these are just some of the things that, when you're out chasing around bees and bugs and butterflies, take those kinds of things into account, because again, it isn't just a question of being up close and getting it. You still have all of the other various compositional components that take place in macro photography that they do in any other type of photography. So go out, find it, have fun, be aware, get great shots. I think it's a common stereotype in macro photography that the perception that all we do in macro photography is shoot close-ups of insects and the dewdrops on the end of a leaf, the tops of flowers, anything that's close that deals with nature. Well, there's just so much more we can do with macro photography and have a lot of fun and create new photographs out of just simple props. And we're going to do one here this morning. I've got a romance novel that I have borrowed from a neighbor that has any number of pages that have been marked that have keywords in them, like the word romance, the word love, companionship, things like this, because we're going to use those words when we place our wedding ring that we've borrowed again, and where we're going to open the book and in the gutter place the wedding ring with my $8 flashlight behind it as a direct light source that is going to create a shadow of a heart using the ring, and you'll see how this works. Then I've just got a couple of other household items. I've got a bag of glass that I'm actually going to use for another macro shot later, and I'm going to open up the book, use those as weights, place my ring in, and we're going to get a really fun shot. You're going to like this. So let's just go ahead and set this up. I'm going to open up my book, I'm going to place my weights, my page marker. So I have this here, my ring, and I'm going to move this light source around here. And you're going to notice that this $8 flashlight, it's a tungsten type, not an LED type. I'd like the tungsten type simply because I like the light quality better than the ones you get on the LED. Oh, look at that. Right off the bat, I'm getting my shadow now. This direct light source is much better to use than, for example, if I thought, okay, well, you've got a romance novel, why aren't you using a candle? I'm not using a candle because the light source is evenly distributed. I need something that's direct, a beam that can come in and create this wonderful heart that I'm getting here. Okay, so now let me find my word love. There it is down here. So now I'm going to slide this up on my light source to make sure that that beam is right, oh, look at that, right where I want it to be. And I move that ring to the point where I can see the word love, because the reason I'm using that word love in there is that I want to have that tie into the message of the heart shape and the romance aspects of it. And I've got my light source right there. And if you notice that my light source is pretty close to this, and the reason I've got it close to it is because if I move further away, the shadow becomes more diffused. The closer I am with this flashlight right on top of this, I get a very defined shape, a darker shadow. And then I've got the word love just below one of the shadows, so I can focus on that. I really don't care here if everything kind of goes out of focus. We have a couple of options that we can do. a lot of depth of field or a little bit of depth of field, and it's something that you can play with to decide which one you like better. I've got the word love just outside of the shadow because I'm going to focus on that. The shape is so prominent, it's going to work on itself, all by itself, and just let it play. So, let's bring in our macro lens and our camera, which I've got on a tripod. It's going to be necessary to be on a tripod because the shutter speed itself is fairly long, and I want to have that so I can come in right close to it, making sure I'm not touching that. I'm using a 105 macro, and I like the magnification that I'm getting with the 105 macro, which is the lens that is the, ratio on it is 1:1. And I can get a little bit closer. I want to lean over a little bit more, so I'm going to extend this tripod leg. Careful that I don't hit my box. Get my angle. I'm framing this up pretty tight. I'm not seeing the whole book. I'm just seeing the ring, the shape of the ring, and I'm actually focusing on the word love. Now, I'm using a low ISO because I don't need a high ISO because I'm on a tripod. If I were trying to handhold this, which I don't suggest because just your breathing movement with macro is going to go in and out of focus. So get it on the sticks, get a low shutter speed, and I'm good to go. Now, one of the other keys in this is that I got tungsten light. So I can take my white balance and I can put it on tungsten light, which is going to allow my pages to be balanced for that light source, which means they're fairly white pages. The white balance will be white. Well, if I want to warm the shot up, romance, love, and I want to warm it up, well, I can change my white balance and choose my own color temperature. Or you could, if you can't choose your own color temperature in your particular camera model, you can put it on the cloudy or the shade setting, and that automatically warms up your shot. So it's another one of these options that you can utilize to, again, help sell the message of what you're trying to do. And in this particular shot, all I'm simply doing is kind of creating a kind of an card for, like, say, Valentine's Day for my wife. So I'm just going to focus on the word love. I've got a fairly shallow depth of field because I like the fall off of things going out of focus above the word love and below the word love. So instantly your eye goes right to that sharp spot. The message is still there because the shadow is still prominent. It's not going to be a problem at all being able to see that. So it becomes a personal choice how much you want to have in focus and how much you don't. So I'm going with a very shallow depth of field. And my exposure is pretty darn fast when it's like this because the light source is pretty bright. I'm actually at 3/20th of a second here at 2.8 here. And that's going to be my shot. I'm just focused on the word love. We'll let everything else fall into place. Get away from the camera so it's not going to take a peek. Fabulous. She's going to love this. To give myself another option, which, as long as I've gone through the hassle of setting this up, I'm going to stop down as far as I possibly can. In other words, the smallest aperture I can get, which on this particular lens, this 105, is f/45. And so at f/45, now, not only is the word love going to be in focus, I'm actually having almost the entire page now with that depth of field will be in focus. And so consequently, with that smaller aperture, I've also got a much smaller shutter speed now. And so now I'm at almost a half of a second here at f/45. So I'll take that shot, and I take that shot, and now the whole page is in focus. So if you wanted to read more of the text in the romance model and the romance novel, you've got that option. But other than that, shallow depth of field, I liked personally better, but those are two options that you can have to kind of create a different photograph of the same scene. Another fun lesson in macro is to utilize backlight. And so we're going to do a fun little experiment here today where we're going to play with the concept of translucence. I've got some orange and some lemon slices cut very thin so we can see through them. That's kind of key in this shot. I've got a bottle of tonic water that's going to put some fizzy bubbles all over our lemon slices. I've got a glass vase, a clothespin to hold our lemon slice in, and a couple of different backgrounds. The yellow wall is going to serve as a great background light, but then I can take this and put this in, it becomes a white background, or I can just take this blue wrapping paper and put that behind it, and I get a blue background. So it all changes. The real key here is, of course, our backlight. When you've got backlight coming through and we've got glass, This is an idea of a glass that a lot of us might have around the house. This glass isn't going to work very well because the glass is very thick and it's curved. And so if we're trying to get something sharp in macro when you're coming in tight, anytime you've got a curved surface or a thick surface of glass, it's going to be tough to get a good focus. So we found this very thin vase that has glass in the front that's very straight and it's thin. So we'll be able to focus on our lemon and orange slices and still get a good, crisp, sharp image. You know, look at it like looking through an airplane. You know, you look through an airplane window and it's clear, but it's not sharp. We want something that's going to be sharp here so we can feel that translucence and the bubbles that are getting on it. So I got my macro lens on. I've got this backlight. You can see I've just used any item that I found here in the building. We've got a table and a stepple header, and I've been able to position things so I'm getting a good backlight bouncing off. We can get right to shooting. So we're going to take some shots. This is really fun. I've got a lemon slice here. It's sliced really, really thin. And the reason you want it really thin is because it allows a greater sense of translucence coming through from our backlight here, and we really want to have that in this shot. And so before I waste my fizzy, I'm actually going to come in now, and with the orange and lemon slices that you're using, you want to have your camera angle, your lens, pretty much parallel with, again, with your lemon slice, because if it's off like this, again, I'm going to have issues of focus. So I'm going to try to keep my lens in the same plane as my lemon slice. And now this is where you kind of have to monkey around a little bit in order to get it just right. But the other thing is that I'm not showing the whole lemon slice. I'm coming in and just showing parts of it. So I'm basically at the mid-range down and then letting my background kind of, the translucence happen with my background. And then once I've got this all squared up so I don't waste my fizzies, I come in, and now that I'm all good, now I'm going to go ahead and open my fizzies. Be careful when you open up your fizz bottle, because I've done this before where it sprays all over the floor, so be aware of that. So let's go ahead and pour this in. Let the effervescent qualities of tonic do its magic. And I'm going to bring it right up to just above my halfway point, and you can see the fuzzy bottles will start to, bubbles will start to congregate. There they are. Look at that. Oh. And then I'll just start shooting away. Check that exposure, that looks fabulous. Now that's one shot. Now I'm bouncing off the wall. I've got a yellow wall here. It's kind of a neat wall, it kind of works well with the lemon. But if I really want to give it a really clean kind of a, you know, mountain stream kind of a look, I've got a basic old white piece of paper, and I can just put that white piece of paper behind it. Wow, look at that translucence. Now everything's just gone super, super white. Take a look at that, and sometimes this might be where you want, no, that looks perfect. And if I want to change my background even a little bit more, just got some wrapping paper, and I like this. I'm not worried about it being completely flat. In fact, the fact that it's got a couple of ridges and what have you in it actually lends itself to creating a slightly different background, so it's not perfectly even, and I can look through the camera and see where that takes place. There it is right there. I like that dark blue right where the highlights are. Now I've got a nice blue backdrop. So in the same spot, I haven't moved, white piece of paper, blue piece of paper, my yellow wall, 3 distinctly different shots. Let's try something different. Let's go to an orange. It's a little bit different color. It's not tremendously different, but it is different. So let's give that a shot here. Let's see what we can't get with Mr. Citrus here, orange. So we're gonna drop that in. And now to change things up a little bit too, rather than having it straight at us, we're going to turn it sideways, and we're going to try to get these bubbles to show up, oh, look at that, in a little different fashion. There we go, the light's much different. I'm going to add a little bit more effervescence. We like effervescence. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, the bubbles are so much different now, and the rind is what's giving us that little different color. Make sure everything, oh, that looks fabulous. Love that. Oranges and lemons, oh my. The translucent quality of using these lemons and oranges with that backlight is a fun way to shoot. And you can vary your shots by very simple things, by coming closer, moving further back, showing part of the orange, a curve of the orange or the lemon. Or you can even come in and see the center of the lemon or the orange and use that as a focal point for composition. For the most part, the shot's pretty simple. It's the effervescence of the bubbling water over the backlit color of the lemon or orange in your backdrop. So just varying that a little bit, you can come up with, 5 or 6 different shots and really get something that's quite unique and very simple to do. Well, a new scenario. The fizz is all out of our scenario now because we've got a different way to backlight this. We've got some other slices of our oranges and our lemon slices, and we've got a light now that's underneath. And so I've got a piece of glass that the slices are sitting on, a couple of horses, so it's sitting on a couple of places where we can get a light source underneath. And then underneath the glass, because if you just put the glass on and you throw the fruit slices on top of the glass, you're going to get all kinds of weird glare. You're going to have see-through, which we don't want. So there's a couple of things you can do. I've just got an old garbage bag here that's white, and I've got it stretched out under my glass, pulled taut to keep wrinkles and what have you out of it, and that's going to serve as kind of a soft box for my light source. You could use a paper towel, anything like that that you wanted to put underneath that, as long as you've got a way that you can kind of keep the light kind of glowing and distributed evenly from that back source. So light underneath a couple of sawhorses. I'm looking down, nice backlight. The great thing about this kind of design is that the rinds are not translucent, so only the fruit is translucent. If you vary the thickness of the slices, you're varying the translucence of the light coming through them. So if you keep your slices, just like a chef, if you keep your slices all the same size, you're going to have equal translucence in this. The rinds stay dark, so there's your contrast, light and dark. Now the key in this is just trying to find a way to create a nice design. So just like with the effervescent bubbles on the lemon slices, I pulled back, I came in closer, and I came in closer, and I just found ways to make this work. When you make it work, it's really quite magical. And then at times, it goes someplace else where it doesn't even look like slices anymore. It looks like the universe. So it's a lot of fun. So if I had to use one word to describe macro photography, it's simple: texture. There's no other focal length that gives you this opportunity to get this close to your subject and actually feel what the subject is offering. You think about the hairs on a caterpillar, the eyes on a bee, the close-up veins of a leaf as they're going through it, the worn-out capabilities and textures that you get from close-ups of coins like the ones we're going to shoot. These all bring textures to life. You can feel them visually, and that's an unusual place to be in photography. And it's one of these places that when you visit close-up work, you find that you can really get lost in it because it becomes such a wonderful journey of looking at things that only moving a quarter of inch take you someplace else. Moving a light source just a little bit this side or a little bit that side brings you a whole different set of life to your subject. Texture is a great place to go, and with macro photography, we can go there. Let's go show you some examples with these coins. So I've got a plate of coins that I borrowed from a neighbor who collects coins, and I've got this marvelous collection of coins that date back. I think I saw one here from 1817 right up to the current day. So I've got this real potpourri of a lot of different coins that are going to make a great textural detail shot of these coins. So as you can see, I didn't have to go out and spend millions of dollars in order to shoot these, and I'm using just a clamp light with a 60-watt bulb in it. I've got a plate from the cupboard, a couple pieces of board, because it's easier for me to stack the plate as I rise it up towards the camera than it is for me to keep fumbling with the tripod and the camera in order to get the coins where they want. So some of the considerations that I make when I'm shooting things like this: one, if we think about directional of light, I can keep moving this chair, keep moving my light around. And every time I do that, depending upon where the coins are lying, I'm going to get shadows on the edges of all those coins. I want that. And so just by moving this slightly around and around and around, I can change the dramatic scene of each shot, but I haven't moved my camera. So it's just a light thing. Also, I could raise that camera up, and if I have the light coming straight down onto the coins, that offers a different kind of a light. But look at it again, like the sunrise and sunset. If I'm straight over it, high noon, everything flattens out. It's a two-dimensional shot. The other thing you have to consider when you're shooting close-ups like this, if you're shooting plants and flowers and you're chasing a bee, you can't really control it. But because I've got a controlled situation here, I'm on a tripod, I've got a plate, I've got a light, it could be next to a window, but the scene is set. It's not going to move. But some of the considerations I have to make, the coins are flat. And as I throw the coins down and they find their position and I seek out a composition, one coin might be slanted a little bit. And if that's the main coin that I'm photographing, I want to make sure that the plane of my lens is at the same angle. Because if it's at this angle, then what happens in macro photography, the high point and low point are going to be dramatically different in focus. So I'm trying to pull those together by taking my angle of my camera, making sure that it matches the angle of the coin so I don't have a depth of field issue. And if I need to take care of depth of field, I'll automatically stop down. But that's one of the ways that you can minimize that. So, very simple setup. I can come in from a compositional standpoint and shoot a lot of coins, or come in really, really tight to the maximum focal point of a textural shots with this. I'm using a 105 lens. Now, I'm using one light source. I've got one light source coming in, and there's some gaps. You know, when you stack coins, you're going to get dark shadows, which is good for the shot. But sometimes when that happens, I'm losing some of the textures in some of the other coins. So I've just got a piece of notebook paper from my desk, and I can simply come in here and just moving that in and out. I gain 2 stops of light just by bringing this in, bouncing it off the directional light here. It's a great way to keep shooting. White balance, tungsten light, I'm shooting white balance. I'm on the sticks, I can shoot at my smallest ISO so I get maximum clarity in my shot. White balance is set. I'm good to go, shutter speed's fast enough, but it doesn't matter because I'm on the sticks. I'm going for maximum depth of field here. We're ready to start shooting. So I've got my plate of coins, and you know, there's a couple of considerations you have to make when you're shooting macro. There's these distances in macro that you can play with and all still be within that umbrella of macro shooting. And so I tend to, when I have a plate like this, I tend to pull back a little bit and still get a feel for the coins, looking for that compositional aspect that all of the coins, you see a mixture, in other words. I'm seeing a diversity of coins. So I'll take that first shot, I'll move the light, get the light to where I want to be. You'll see that contrast, that rim lighting, get the pile, because you know, sometimes you can't just throw things down. You've got to move things around a little bit to get them where you want to be. You'll notice in my setup here, I don't move the tripod so much because having the tripod legs around whatever it is table you've got to shoot on, it's easier for me to just go ahead and stick another piece of wood under my plate to raise the plate closer to the lens rather than constantly making that adjustment. And believe me, you'll see what I mean when you're dealing with macro. You don't want to have to move your tripod too many times. It's nice just to move the plate up towards you. So then I find that composition where I've closed in away from some of the coins that were on the edges, and I'm coming in much tighter. And so now I've got a couple of faces, and if you can see, well, I'm going to pull that face in. I'm going to make sure that it's right to the left. I've got another face I can see on the face of a coin onto the right. I'm going to make sure I'm not cutting them off. They're both there. Nice tight shot, one full coin in the frame, so now I'm tight. Boom, there's that shot. Now I come in even closer. So now I'm really going for the textures on a coin. And I'm looking for a coin that's old, one that I can really have that side light at a deep angle. So the coin has been worn to the point to where it's no longer, the lettering is not a high relief, it's a low relief. So I need to have that light source at an angle that really brings out the contrast in the dates. So I'm really utilizing the macro textural aspects of this by having my light at a slight angle right off to the side, and I'm coming in really, really tight on that coin. Boy, look at that difference. You can really see it. Now you can really read that date, and you can really see it. I'm very close. You can actually feel how these coins have been worn over time. Now, something that happens when you've got these coins lying down there, the angles of the coins can be in a way that they're kind of moving away from the light source. So they're in shadow. So one of the ways that we can correct that is I'll just grab a piece of paper, white piece of paper, or I'll even take the back of my hand and notice this gold coin. I'll put my hand on the other side of this gold coin. If I just bring it in so it's just outside of my frame on the opposite side of my light source and tilt my hand right there, you can actually see where that bounce light has lit up that coin. I move it away, dark. Move my hand in again, light. And all of this is the textural components of getting a good macro shot with an $8 light and a close-up shot of these coins. Have fun, this is a blast. So you've seen from what we've been doing, we've encountered any number of subjects in the macro world of photography, and it's fun. You know, butterflies, bees, coins, oh my. And we've had a lot of fun doing it. And you can continue to do macro photography in your backyard, on the windowsill, in the bottom of a plate, like with the coins. All of these things are exciting new ventures into the world of macro. And with a little bit of research, you can find that finding butterflies and caterpillars when they hatch are places to go and destinations to go do macro photography. You can look in your backyard and find the particular plant, the hawkweed, the daisies, the roses that come out. Here's a great time to go out and grab those, shoot them outside, bring them inside if it's too windy. All of these things that you've seen throughout this DVD, we can do with macro photography. Go out and expand yourself. Don't always shoot landscapes. Come in, and see that whole new world of macro.
Mastering photography takes persistence and practice. Stay with it. Look forward to more inspiring lessons in future editions of the Ultimate Photo Guide Digital Photography series.